Gosh, it's time for another Marvel Snap patch review already. Before we dive into the details though, I'd like to ask your opinion on something. Do you like when these patches fall right at the start of the season like they did this month and last month? I'd be curious to share that feedback with Second Dinner from all of y'all. And if you want to know my thoughts on that topic, be sure to watch this video all the way through to the end. I say it's an interesting question because it's not always going to be the case. Marvel Snap has a 4-week patch cycle, which means that for some months like this one and the last one, it lines up perfectly at the start of the season, but that's going to eventually change again when we hit that 5-week season and the patches keep going at those 4-week intervals. I'd be curious to know if this is something people enjoy or something that they dislike, and if Second Dinner should consider always having them at the start or potentially never having them at the start if people prefer them to be separated. That said, let's go ahead and dive into the details of today's card changes in this patch, and boy golly are they fantastic. To start with, we have a small, what is effectively just an over-the-air update with Absorbing Man getting knocked from his recently increased 4-5 stat line down to just a 4-4. Second Dinner noted that when they locked in the changes for the OTA that happened this past Thursday, it was before this Forge Brood Absorbing Man Patriot Surfer amalgamation had kind of taken Conquest and the Ladder by storm. They noted that they just want to kind of get out ahead of that known high performing deck with this set of changes, so that way today's potential other card changes that are less powerful per se and more interesting don't get knocked flat before they can have a chance to take off. Overall, I think reducing Absorbing Man down a touch makes a lot of sense, and I think if he ends up being in a spot where he's no longer playable, we could easily see him push back up again in the future, like we recently saw with Dr. Doom. Overall, I enjoy Second Dinner being more proactive than reactive, and I'm glad to see this change coming so quickly on the heels of the data that they've collected. Next, to start with the real card updates in today's patch that involve way more than simple number changes, we have Blade as the first card. Previously, Blade said discard a card from your hand, which was completely at random. Now, Blade says discard the rightmost card from your hand. Second Dinner notes that they're making this change to Blade because he's dropped off in both popularity and win rates among discard strategies, which is definitely something I've anecdotally seen. Blade doesn't really see play in any of the discard decks, and even the discard decks that exist now aren't exactly top tier strategies. I really like this approach of them trying to make the discard decks potentially better by giving you more player agency and control over which cards you're getting rid of. This makes Blade feel more distinct from other discard cards like Swordmaster, for example, that you just play because they have a good stat line. Now, Blade has a pretty solid stat line still, but has a different effect that gives you more control and options over when you're playing him out. All in all, I think the biggest archetype that's going to get a buff from this Blade change is definitely Hela, a deck that really doesn't want to discard a specific card, i.e. its namesake, but wants to have ways to put cards into that discard pile to bring back later on. Second Dinner notes that they're not quite sure if this small change to Blade is going to be enough to put those discard decks on the map as top performers, but it certainly can't hurt. I'm definitely inclined to agree with that line of thinking, and I like the direction they took this change overall. Second Dinner notes that it took players a few months to really figure out Thanos at the start, but once it got optimized, it's basically been a force in the metagame despite multiple changes to other accompanying cards such as Lockjaw and Quinjet. I think this change makes a lot of sense as the card that you would want to attack to make Thanos' kit a little bit weaker. Soulstone effectively adds 5 points of power for 1 energy the path that it's in, making it an incredible rate card for any 1-drop, and removing the draw from this effect is a pretty big drawback because Thanos is inflating your deck size, and now if 2 of the stones are no longer replacing themselves, that means it's coming at a larger cost than it previous was to your deck's overall consistency, which I think is still a fair trade-off considering the amount of utility that these stones provide. Second Dinner closes their thoughts on this Thanos change by noting that they don't think that this is going to ultimately make Thanos unplayable, but it should bring its power level down a little bit to give other decks more breathing room, which I'm definitely inclined to agree with. Up next, we have a text box change to SpiderHam, who previously transformed the highest cost card in your opponent's hand into a pig, keeping its power and cost. Now, SpiderHam will be transforming the leftmost card in your opponent's hand to a pig, keeping its power and cost. This change, second in our notes, is a chance to give 6 energy cards a little bit more breathing room against this porkishly, devilishly disruptive card. Most notably, discard strategies with Apocalypse have basically fallen off the map in a post-SpiderHam world, in large part due to their key card Apocalypse basically always getting porked. This change lets SpiderHam still remain disruptive, and incidentally, something that's worth noting about it is that SpiderHam is still a little bit more likely to hit 6 energy cards with his effect the longer you wait in the game to play him out, because higher cost cards tend to move leftmost as they sit in the player's hands. That being said, discarded cards that get regenerated like Apocalypse will move to the right, so this change will allow discard players to kind of proactively play out their discard, keeping the cards that they care about on the right side of their hand. This also adds a really neat element of counterplay to opposing SpiderHams. You can be thinking about which card in your hand is deterministically going to get porked if your opponent plays the card, and then plan out your turns accordingly around this disruption. Overall, I think this change is probably a little bit of a nerf on average, but definitely a side grade in certain situations, with the biggest downside to this change being if you bounce SpiderHam back to your hand and play him back out, you're guaranteed to hit that same card if your opponent still hasn't played the pig out from their hand. Our final card rework in this patch is doozy. Snowguard, often lauded as one of the worst cards in the game, abysmal play rate, even worse win rate, is getting the biggest glow up we have ever seen in Marvel Snap, in my opinion. Now, instead of being a 1/2 that changes back and forth every turn between this hawk and bear form in your hand, giving you little control over which effect you get when, Snowguard will be a 1/2 with the on reveal effect of adding a hawk and bear auras to your hand. These hawk and bear auras are 2/3s themselves, with the on reveal effects that they previously jumped back and forth between in your hand. The hawk will allow both players to ignore all location abilities until the end of the next turn, and bear re-triggers the effect of the location that it's played at. This is a huge power boost to this card, and I think it makes this card not only playable, but potentially a format staple. For starters, this card gives you 8 points worth of stats across 3 bodies just at face value. There are reasonable rates, a 1/2 and 2/3s. You now have finesse control over which turns you want to have hawk or bear's effect on. And on top of all of that, these cards also work with things like Quinjet or Collector or even Loki that recently joined us via the season pass that care about just having more cards in your hand. This is an exciting and powerful change. It makes sense why Snowguard is in an upcoming spotlight now. A lot of people, myself included, were a little weary of that in the data mines, and with this rework, this card is going to be pretty desirable, I would wager. I'm excited to try her as a utility card in a variety of decks now, and the extra icing cherry on top of this wonderful rework cake is that your Snowguard herself is going to sit on the battlefield now, meaning that you'll even get to enjoy any wonderful variant artwork you've purchased for her, which previously was only glimpsable in your deck editor. To answer the question that I posed to all of you at the start of the video, what is preferable, the patches being at the start of the season or sometime later on? Personally, I really prefer all of these changes to cards coming with the start of the season. It makes everything feel kind of big and fresh. Snap doesn't have bigger set releases like we see in other card games, and I think having a season pass plus a patch kind of gives us that almost new set feel where we get a handful of effectively new cards with reworks like we have today without having to release a whole pile of brand new cards. Overall, I think the only change I would prefer to have happen is it would be kind of nice if the patch and the season rollover both went live at the exact same time. I think it's a little bit awkward that we have like the season rollover start Monday night here US time, and then the patch comes sometime in the following days. I think it would be ideal if they could line those up. I'm curious to see what you all think about that as I'm reading through comments after this video posts. As always, thanks for watching all the way through to the end of the video. If you enjoyed my musings on what's happening in this patch today, I would love it if you'd snap that like button to help this video reach some more people. I'd also love to know what decks you're excited to build and play with these freshly modified cards. Hopefully, we'll see you back again real soon for another daily Marvel Snap video here on YouTube. Peace, folks, and happy snapping.